Good day everyone, I am Christine Landayan and the topic that my group and I will be reporting today is called Agrarian Reform and its role in the Philippine development. So without further ado, let's get started. To begin, we will first discuss our learning outcome. So at the end of this discussion, it is expected that the students will be able to define agrarian reform, familiarize with its history, and understand its role in the Philippine development. So now, let's get started.
Good day, I am Dan Anthony, and before we dive into the depth of agrarian reform and its role in the Philippine development, let me share first some preview of what is agrarian reform. So let's talk about land reform. So land reform is a change in the system of land ownership. Next, agrarian. Agrarian is cultivated land or cultivation of land, and reform is changing a process or an act to achieve improvements. Therefore, agrarian reform is considered as broader than land reform. It is the rectification of the whole system of agriculture. When we say rectification, it means to set right or correct. Next, what is agrarian reform? In the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law of 1987, Republic Act number 6657, agrarian reform is defined as the redistribution of lands regardless of crops or produce produced to farmers and regular farm workers who are landless, irrespective of tenurial arrangement. What is the purpose of agrarian reform? So, the agrarian reform program is founded on the right of farmers who are landless to own directly or collectively the lands they till, or in the case of other farm workers, to receive a just share of fruits. In other words, the purpose of agrarian reforms is to give those landless farm workers or farmers to have their own land. Next, what are the objectives of agrarian reform? So, the main objective of agrarian reform was to put an end to conflicts in land ownership. Also, it aims to bring stability in the political setup of the country, and it aims to promote equality in the terms of opportunities, income as well as wealth. Why one of the objective of agrarian reform is to end conflicts in land ownership? It is because before there's an issue that some land owned by rich people is not actually ilaha. Gihimuan lang nila og titulo para mailaha. So the solution of the government for this is to give those excess land to landless farm workers or farmers. Also, it is mentioned that it brings stability and equal opportunity to people. It is because it promotes development in innovating our economy by giving landless farm workers income and opportunity to have their own land to gain wealth. Okay, that's it for preview of what is agrarian reform, and may I call in Miss Dimple Solitario for further discussions.
Thank you, Dan. Good day, everyone. I am Dimple Solitario presenting to you the 6 aspects of the agrarian reform under the topic Agrarian Reform and its role to Philippine development. With that, we have the 6 aspects of agrarian reform. First, we have the economic aspect. Second, the socio-cultural aspect. Third, we have religious aspect. Fourth, we have moral. Fifth, we have legal. And lastly, we have the political aspect of agrarian reform. So much for that. Let us know about these aspects of agrarian reform. So let us start first with the economic aspect. So, the agrarian reform in economic aspect plays the most important component of the Philippine economy, in which it relies more on the agriculture and agricultural productions or productivity. It is set as an instrument for the increasing of the agricultural production and agricultural productivity of the Philippine economy, as well as the agrarian reform in economic aspect offers a solution for the people or the farmers, specifically the farmers, to have a stable and job employment. Let us move on to the second aspect of agrarian reform, which is the socio-cultural aspect. So, in socio-cultural aspect, it is all about the improvement of the quality life of the farmers, the self-reliance, the self-esteem, as well as the dignity of the farmers. Because in socio-cultural aspect, it enables new opportunity of Filipino people to promote cultural production of Filipino workers. The agrarian reform is one of it that will help indigenous Filipino people promote their cultural products and crops. So let's jump on to the third aspect of the agrarian reform, which is the religious aspect. So as we all know, everything that we have right now in our lives is from God. God created heaven and earth as well as the non-living and the living things. This is for His children, especially the food. When we talk about food, it's all about agriculture. It connects to agriculture, agricultural crops, and production. Furthermore, in the Second Vatican Decree, reaffirms stresses that in the biblical ancestry, it was written that all have the right to having a share of earthly goods sufficient for oneself and one's family to everyone. So, it means that what we have is what others can also have. So much about the religious aspects of agrarian reform. Let us just remember always that we need to rule sharing, giving, and equality of treatment into our fellow human being, because that is what love, that is what being a human, and that is what God wants us. So, let's move on to the fourth aspect of the agrarian reform, which is the moral aspect of agrarian reform. So, in moral aspect of agrarian reform, it is more established that many could see the needs of the distribution of the agricultural products of the farmers, especially those farmers who have difficulties to distribute or to promote their products overseas or from market to market. So, in moral aspect of the agrarian reform, it foresees the importance of the agricultural distribution of the local farmers to rural and even to the national. Also, in the moral aspect of the agrarian reform, it reasons out that the agrarian reform is the fact that the landowner has been more compensated for his investment on land, while the tenant who made the landlord's profits possible is still immersed in poverty. In the legal aspect of our agrarian reform, it is more the government laws and was based on the constitutions. So there are 4 articles and sections that I am presenting to you that promotes the legal aspects of agrarian reform. First, we have the Article 2, Section 10 that promotes the social justice in all phases of national development. Second, we have the Article 2, Section 21 that promotes the comprehensive rural development and agrarian reform. Second, we have the Article 2, Section 21 that promotes the comprehensive rural development and agrarian reform. It focuses on the rural development of distribution of the production from rural market to market. In the legal aspect of agrarian reform, pertaining the next article, it promotes an equal work opportunity to every individual, so there is no reason for others to mistreated and to take advantage to the tenants. As well as this article promotes a full protection to every labor, and this is under the Constitution, Article 13, Section 2. Last article, we have the Article 13, Section 4 to 7. This promotes the agrarian reforms programs, specifically the housing programs for homeless citizens. So agrarian reform doesn't only focus on agricultural productions or crops, but also into agricultural infrastructures that will help every citizen of the entire country to have their four corners, to live safely and secured in the four-corner houses. Lastly, we have the political aspect of the agrarian reform. So, when we say about political aspect, it talks about the political government and the farmers. Or shall we say, the political government and the agricultures. So, the top priority of the political government is the agrarian reform because they see many potentials into agriculture that will help aid the poverty of the whole country, not just for the living of every farmers or every individuals who are producing agricultural crops, but also for the whole country to ease the poverty living of every Filipino. So that would be all about the 6 aspects of agrarian reform. I hope you learned something. Once again, I am Dimple Solitario, and now I am calling Miss Christine Landayan for further discussion.
Good day everyone! Today I will be reporting the brief history of agrarian reform on different era. First, let's discuss what happened during the pre-colonial period. So, before the Spaniards came to the Philippines, Filipinos lived in villages or barangays ruled by datus. Before, everyone had access to the fruits of the soil. Money was unknown and rice serves as the medium of exchange. In short, the pre-Spanish period could be described as a time of freedom and equality in terms of access to land. Although it was evident that there was an established social structure, everyone can still obtain any produce in exchange of rice. So diri nga time wala pa diri landowners kay consider man nga communal property sa tanang tao sa barangay ang mga land. During the Spanish era, land ownership started. When the Spaniards came to the Philippines, the colonial government introduced a pueblo agriculture, a system wherein natives rural communities is given hectares to cultivate. The Spanish also introduced other agriculture systems, but some were unfair to the natives. Next, when the United States occupied the Philippines, they purchased lands for distribution to tenants. However, because of high prices, most of these estates went to the rich people, thus peasants uprise. In this time, agrarian problem worsened. Many people soon began to resort to armed means to get back their lands. They claimed that the lands they were tilling were owned by their ancestors before these lands were claimed by landlords. On the other hand, during the Japanese era, peasants and workers organized the Hukbalahap, also known as Hukbong Bayan Laban sa mga Hapon, on March 29, 1942 as an anti-Japanese group. During the Japanese occupation in the Philippines, the Hukbalahap controlled the areas of Luzon. They took over vast lands and gave the lands and harvest to the people. From the brief history that I discussed earlier, we can conclude that for a long period of time, the agrarian system of the Philippines was controlled by the foreigners and landlords during the different era. The small farmers in the Philippines were struggling for their right to other natural resources, so they had a price. In order to stop this conflict, the government implemented the agrarian reform as a social justice measure to change the prevailing unjust and inequitable ownership of land. Here are some of the government initiative. During the time of President DIOSDADO MACAPAGAL, he was considered as the father of agrarian reform because it was during his term that the Agricultural Land Reform or RA number 3844 was enacted in August 8, 1963. So sa panahon ni President MACAPAGAL, nagkaroon ng tamang sistema sa agrikultura dahil nagkaroon ng isang batas na pumaprotekta sa karapatan ng mga magsasaka. During the term of President Ferdinand Marcos, he signed Republic Act No. 6389 or the Code of Agrarian Reform, which created the Department of Agrarian Reform or DAR. He also signed the Presidential Decree No. 27, which provided tenanted lands devoted to rice and corn to pass ownership to the tenants and lowered the ceiling for landholding to 7 hectares. President Marcos' agrarian reform was also labeled as revolutionary by some sectors. This agrarian reform program was designed to uplift the farmers from poverty and ignorance and to make them useful, dignified, responsible, and progressive partners in nation building. Last but not the least, in 1988, President CORAZON AQUINO signed Republic Act No. 6657, popularly known as Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program or CARP. It is also known as the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law or CARL. In this act, agrarian reform is defined as the redistribution of lands regardless of crops or foods produced to farmers and regular farm workers who are landless, irrespective of tenurial arrangement. According to this research, this is considered as the most comprehensive agrarian reform law because it covers all private and public lands and other lands suitable for agriculture. To sum it up, based on this report, we can say that agriculture plays a great role in our community. Without a proper law, there will be war. Hence, the existence of the agrarian reform is a must as it will help prevent conflict and alleviate poverty. That's all, and now let us proceed to the next reporter.
Thank you, Tyne. Good day, everyone. I am Hannah Celo, and for the continuation, I'm going to discuss the following. So, what is the role of agrarian reform in the Philippine development? On our screen, it is stated there that agrarian reform has helped to improve the socio-economic conditions of landless farmer and the Philippines' political development by involving the landless in policy making and distribution of large private land holdings to the landless. Agrarian reform helped to alleviate unemployment and increase agricultural production and productivity. Therefore, the agrarian reform contributed to relieve the unemployment pressure and to increase agricultural production and productivity, although it could not prevent a massive exodus of rural population from the mountains and the most marginal areas. The program of public work was in turn quite successful in sustaining both employment and income. Another is agrarian reform in the Philippines seeks to solve the centuries-old problem of landlessness in the rural areas. So what is the role of agrarian reform in the Philippine development? Agrarian reform also protect farmer and ensure their security of tenure. We can also know that by reading the Republic Act number 6657 in section 6 or the retention limits. Agrarian reform in Philippine development also promote farmers' right and welfare, and it helped to ensure the food security. Among the many lessons that we can learn from CAPR or the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program are that agrarian reform is not simply land distribution. Poor farmers used to paternalize ways of the old system, cannot afford to take the full risk of owning land. They have been provided with comprehensive, as in total, package of support services before access to land can be translated in productivity and growth, and into food security and freedom from poverty. In conclusion, there is no doubt that agrarian reform will continuously aim to provide less inconvenience for former landless farmers, promote social equity and justice, as well as strengthening food security and gradually alleviating poverty in the Philippines. Thus, it is crucial in the Philippine development. Moreover, agrarian reform is important for rural democratization and the land-dependent rural poor's enjoyment of basic human rights. Philippine society is shaped by land-based power, structure, and regional rural elites' control of vast tracts of land service as their ticket to elective office.
So that's all. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. We hope that you were able to learn something from today's discussion about the agrarian reform and its role in the Philippine development. That's all, and God bless.